Alright, so I'm Kevin Bay. Uh, Howdy. Last time I did this pretty much sans a script with just notes because I was like, I can do this fine and it'll be fine. But that included me saying a lot, which I assume is annoying. So I've written a short lecture, this time on contemporary conceptions of fat and class, that I'm going to share with you today. There's some discussion questions at the end. We can break for questions at any time that anyone has to have something explained further. That's fine. My husband David is watching the chat to make sure that anybody who feels like maybe yelling some stuff fresh from their own beehole can maybe hold those comments until the end of the lecture. It'll be fun, really. Please feel free to say anything you would like in the chat, and let's begin. Oh, and we did one of these before, and the link to it is down in the description. There's also a link to my Patreon if you feel like maybe giving me $1 a month for doing these lectures, which I would be fine with, but, you know, no pressure. So, continuing with our lectures on fat and class. After a brief review of the ways fat and thin have been used to demarcate lines of civilization, particularly with regards to race, we can now see that fat hate emerged well before any negative health consequences were commonly associated with fatness by doctors. As you will recall, it was patients who pushed for these diets as tools in their own projects of self-making in a newly urbanized industrial economy. Why do I write like that? I feel like I should maybe explain that in simpler terms. Like we discussed last time, people were able to have access to food and more sedentary jobs at rates that they had never been able to access them before, and so this pressure to maintain a thin ideal, to not be too affected by the pleasures of modernity, to have a civilized body rather than an atavistic body, that brought about this surge of diet products, which we discussed last time. But you might be curious why we still have all of this same BS, right? I mean, you may be curious why this is particularly bad in the West. And for that, we should get into neoliberalism. Wait, don't go. Really, for real. This is going to be like the most painless discussion of neoliberalism you've ever had in your life. I promise. I will make this so easy. Just give me a chance. So, neoliberalism, Shugart explains that neoliberalism is kind of purposefully opaque in its meaning, because it ascribes more responsibility to the citizenry, basically all responsibility, to a class of consumer citizen that it doesn't ascribe to government, or especially to corporations. So that means that we, as the consumer citizen, it's our job to basically maintain the moral rightness of the country through our consuming habits, and also because all of this is sort of linked to our concept of individual liberty, it's our job to make ourselves, to form an identity through our consumption habits. And when I say consumption, I don't just mean food. I'm talking about the clothes we buy and wear, the classes we take, the books we read, the cars we drive, everything we spend money on. And since capitalism touches everything, that means everything. Everything becomes tied to our identity. Everything we buy and use becomes intimately tied to our identity in this framework. So, but the way Shugart explains it in Heavy is, in the case of neoliberalism, the public's unfamiliarity with the term may also be because its basic tenets entail configuring the relationships among market, government, and citizenry in such a way as to clearly privilege the market to a point that some critics describe as exploitative, and thus it is more profitably, literally and figuratively, left obscure. So, neoliberalism is an economic philosophy that operationally ascribes virtually all responsibility for personal and social welfare to the individual, articulating, according to Shugart, this responsibility as crucial to personal freedom and individual liberty. So the idea that we vote with our wallets, that's like tied in deeply to neoliberalism. I'm sure you've heard that phrase before, vote with your wallet. Like, it's a very neoliberal term that really only works for a certain class of people and still ends up putting all the responsibility onto this individual consumer citizen who represents their citizenship through the way they consume. Shugart describes this as basically, it's kind of an intersection, neoliberalism is. So there's, our political philosophy is democracy, but our political economy is capitalism. And sort of in the place where those two things tend to make, I guess, peace with each other, there lies neoliberalism. Rebecca Popenoe, this anthropologist who we've talked about before, theorizes in her essay Ideal that this individualism, the thing that Shugart tells us is very central to neoliberalism, is why people, particularly women, experience so much angst about their weight and failing to live up to the thin ideal. Her quote is, "In the West, where we have the freedom to develop an individual identity, we also have the personal duty to do so. It is up to each individual to determine their own fate, and characteristics, from temperament to appearance, are readily interpreted not as givens, but as under an individual's own control and design. Thus, if a woman fails to live up to the ideal, it is thought to be her own fault." And there's this great line from her in this same essay that I love. I don't like the entire essay, but I think she makes some really salient points in it, and this line in particular: "The opportunity to invent oneself imposes a great burden on the psyche as well as on the body." So, in this way, women who have limited options to achieve success in a patriarchal society are basically exhorted to consume products, diets, and programs that are meant to help them achieve this full consumer citizen status. Lebesco kind of breaks down the idea of citizenship being linked to beauty, and the idea of our beauty standards sort of feeding back into that with this quote: "Body type, citizenship, and moral type have been long linked. Beautiful and healthy cluster to connote a good citizen, while ill and ugly put one in the citizenship doghouse." And she goes on to quote Sandra L. Gilman, who explains, "The good citizen cannot be ugly and therefore cannot be infected by or infect members of society with dangerous illnesses that would be marked on their physiognomies." So, for a fat woman who's trying to reach that status of consumer citizen in this neoliberal framework, she has to be basically subsumed by capitalism in this way that this activist Nomi Lam described in this zine, I'm So Fucking Beautiful, as being relegated forever to the pathetically needy consumer base. Like, she's never going to achieve this full citizenship as long as she's fat. The fat woman can't exist in this neoliberal framework of individualism and individual achievement and individual success, because as we've previously discussed, the fat body was specifically coded as inferior, especially racially inferior, and especially with regards to class. So, there's this great quote from Wendy Chapkus that I feel kind of sums up this sort of pressure women are under when it comes to the beauty ideal, which is, for a woman then, her traditional, if entirely unreliable ticket to success in life and transcendence beyond it is the mortal body. The woman who is awarded the title of beauty momentarily escapes into the eternal ideal. Yet she knows, as each woman must, that she has been or will be seen as ugly in her lifetime. To be beautiful is to exist in a moment framed by expectation and fear. And the reason for that fear actually has been supported by the legal system. Like, ugly people have had laws against them. These laws were brought about mostly to police disfigured and disabled, impoverished people. There was this idea in the progressive era that Emily Skidmore discusses in her book True Sex, that poor people were blighted with moral degeneracy and with physical markings. Like, it's that kind of picture of Dorian Gray kind of leftover, where, like, the idea is your physical self reflects your moral blights. But really, this mostly was used as a way to harass impoverished, disabled, and disfigured people, and people who didn't fit the norm, but mostly just impoverished people, people who were beggars. In 1881, there was a Chicago ordinance where anyone deemed an unsightly object could be fined $1 every time they were seen in public. And so there are, like, literal laws that have pushed those we have deemed ugly out of the public sphere, marking them as non-citizens. And this continues to this day. Like, the idea of a bathroom bill against transgender people is really just the idea of being able to police the trans woman who doesn't pass, or the trans man who doesn't pass. Like, it's about harassing, like, you know, all trans people, but the way that it will be most violently applied will be to those people who are deemed, quote, ugly, unquote. Those people who don't fit this societal norm. They will be legally punished by this. So we see how this concept of, like, beauty and ugliness can feed into class and citizenship and the way that we constitute what is a good body for the national body. And anxieties about the national body is something that I think we're going to get into next. And we'll talk about how epidemics have kind of, like, sort of represent this white nationalist fear of invading forces, weakening the national body. So we'll get into that next time. For now, let's try some discussion questions. Considering what we've talked about with neoliberalism, I'm curious what you all think about the idea. I don't know if you've noticed, but body positivity and fat activism is unusually focused on the consumer rights of the fat person. Where is the thing that we can buy? Is the question I think most people ascribe to body positivity. How do we reconcile that very real need, because we do need clothes, we need them. How do we reconcile that need to not only need clothes, but to make ourselves beautiful enough to be citizens, with our need to break down the hierarchy that sort of necessitates that in the first place? I'm curious what you all think. Oh, there's all kinds of people.
Yeah, I was trying to let you know that you should be able to see the chat.
I'm sorry, I was just reading that, and I'm so excited that all of you are actually talking to me. Button Addict says, I'm sure some of the horror genre villains get a lot of their disfigurement from that idea also. They're so evil and immoral inside, so it must show outside. I absolutely agree with that. I absolutely think that is something that we see in video games and horror genre movies a lot. There's this wonderful essay called The Monstrous Feminine that, if you look it up, discusses the way that women and body horror are conceptualized together in horror movies, and it's awesome. And Button Addict also asked if there were ugly laws until very recently, and yes, I think that they were in effect until the 1970s. It's messed up. Mars's Pan points out that Sandra L. Gilman probably wrote something like this in his intro to Fat Boys about cultural construction of the body. I just got that book, and I haven't started it yet, so I'm going to start that one probably not tonight because I need to finish up some interview questions for some people, but this weekend I'm going to try to get into that one. Ethical consumption under capitalism is inherently flawed. That is very true. Right, there's this consumption of fashion idea, Button Addict. This idea that the way that we're going to find a way to free ourselves is going to be through the clothes we can buy. And I find myself concerned about that because it feels like it's still replicating these kind of individualism that's sort of already so oppressively focused on fat bodies. Mars's Pan is writing a final and is going to be quoting from Gilman in Fat Boys. I am excited for you. I'm always excited to hear about people getting to bring their fat studies into actual academic settings, because you all know that I'm just a rogue academic out here, just reading books and sharing what I learn. So One of the things I liked about the intro to Fat Boys, because I started it, I think I read a couple pages of it as soon as it arrived, because I was like, it's here. Was I really liked how it pointed out that, like, fat is beyond just a feminist issue. Like, fat is absolutely very much an issue that affects women, but we can also see that in its construction of race, and in its construction of ability, and in its construction of class, and all of that, like, the way it interacts with all of those constructions, we can see that it goes beyond being just a women's issue. It's an issue that really affects all genders. Oh, Reconstructing Obesity. I have not heard of that book. Nice. The fashion industry and its body positive campaigns still focus on mostly white acceptable body types, acceptable, from Button Addict, and that is very true. I think that's a major problem, but I also don't know what the solution to it is. I mean, obviously the solution everyone says is more representation, but I'm also hesitant to celebrate brands that kind of build their advertisement off of activism. I find that scary. Mars's Pan is pointing out that specifically plus size companies sell such expensive clothes, and I think that is very true. I would suggest for any of the femme dressing people out there, back when I used to be in the closet, I used the company Reb Dolls a lot, and they're pretty cheap, and they go up to a 5X, and I support them. I can't wear the clothes anymore because it's all super femme, and I came out as a man, and I'm just more comfortable dressing more masculine. Button Addict says that sometimes it feels like tokenizing, I think in response to the idea that, that, you know, I don't want corporations running their ads off my activism. And yeah, I think that's a large part of it, is that sometimes it really does feel that, like, they're like, and look, we got a fat person too, like, we checked all the boxes, and it's not really, like, meaningful, and it's not really, like, meaningfully addressing the culture that led to that exclusion in the first place. I don't know. Like, I want us to be included, and I want us to all be able to see ourselves all over the place, and I think that's so important. But I also think it's so important to understand that when we're looking at any body that's being shown to us to sell us something, there's something kind of exploitative about that in its own way. Oh, look, they're queer also. Yes. Yes, Button Addict. Yes. When you can check all the boxes, they have, like, the one token character, and they're like, she's a trans black Jewish lesbian, and you're like, they exist, and I'm glad that they're getting representation too, but did you just try to check off every token box on one character? Because you know that, like, if it's, like, I don't know, that character tends to come to me from white people who are trying to get all their diversity down in one character. It's like a cast of all white people and, like, one person of color who's also disabled and also queer and also trans. I'm kidding. Trans people don't get any media representation. Virtue signaling is a very big thing in capitalism, Mars's Pam points out. Yeah, I think that a lot of times we accuse people of virtue signaling without really considering that we should be accusing corporations of virtue signaling. Like, I don't really know. Most people I take at their word when they tell me that they care about something, but when a corporation tells me they care about something, I'm like, sounds fake. Well, and the reason that they expect us to reward them for being good is because we vote with our wallets. It's that same neoliberal idea of we, the individual consumer, control the social and moral good of our world through the purchasing choices we make. And whether that purchasing is like what we watch or what games we play or any of that, like, and that's not to say, like, there's a thing right now going on with, I think BattleTech. There's a thing going on where, like, a bunch of gamers or a bunch of mad gamers online are mad online because BattleTech has they pronouns in it. And in response, a bunch of not mad gamers are mad online, like, I guess, maybe pre-ordering it. Like, I'm sure some people are actually interested in the game, and I support them for being actually interested in the game. But I also know that some people are out there just supporting it to show their opposition to the people who don't support it, and I'm like, I don't know. It just always reminds me of that line when it's Zappa versus Zappa. Zappa always wins. Like it just like it feels like the only person who wins in that situation is whoever is selling the product. And I find myself like, I don't know, always a little hesitant in those situations. Though I should point out that Battletech is, I think, being made by a small indie studio, and it's like when you're dealing with small indie studios, it's Mars's Pan points out Saints Row 2 had they pronouns in it, and it came out in 2008. That's very true. No, I think there should be more games with they them pronoun options, is what I'm saying. I think there should be mini games, and I think that is very true. I don't know if that means that everyone who wants that, because the argument is, well, if you want those games, you should support those games always when they show up. And I think even recently we've seen issues where games that had really good representation maybe also had some kind of shadier stuff come to light. Like, I think we've seen that happen in a few situations now. One that I'm specifically referencing, not by name. But it's bringing it back to the idea of consumerism. The idea is, like, are we always supposed to support every product that comes out that is made for us, is marketed to our identity, or whatever? Like, are we thus required to run out and buy every single video game that's got trans rep in it? Every single video game that's got fat rep in it? Like, I don't know. Right, Button Addict points out, I have heard that argument in plus-size communities with fashion. If we want extended sizes, we should support and buy the stuff that is out there, even if it's expensive. And, like, that's just not realistic for someone like me who has a Patreon that sits at $600 a month, and someone like people who are low income. We can't spend hundreds of dollars on clothes. Like, we just can't. Like, and that wouldn't be a problem per se, but there's still this, like, concept of, like, individualism where everyone has the responsibility to make themselves through their consuming habits and through their consumer practices. And some people just don't have access to that. Money is, like, a problem. Mars's Pam points out the Tomb Raider 2013 game has a fairly racially diverse main team, but the literal whole story is Lara Croft being a bad white archaeologist who's still antiquarian. That's very true, like, and that doesn't mean that you can't, like playing a video game, but, you know, maybe don't hold it up like it's some kind of, like, revolutionary tract or something. Like, finally, I'm fighting sexism by buying this game. Like, I don't think that's how it works. Just like, I don't think that anyone, like, I don't know. I've had quite a change of heart on all of this as I've gotten slightly older. But okay, that discussion got a little off from the original point, but was good. Was still good. But Nautic points out you can support something while knowing it's problematic, and I think that's true. And I think it's more important for people to start realizing that supporting something is not the same thing as doing something. Like, I know that's a I own all the Twilight books, but I don't recommend them as a bastion of relationship goals. I like that. I know this is often kind of a thorny subject, but I think we have to be careful about ascribing activism to our consumer habits. I think that we have to be careful about describing things that we, like, moments where we've purchased things as moments of activism. And I know that that's probably super hypocritical of me to say, because, like, people support me on Patreon. They like, you know, I am also a product that is for sale. So it's definitely hypocritical of me to point that out. But I do think it's important for people to be careful to be careful how they describe their purchasing habits. Like, I don't think our purchasing habits are ever going to be revolutionary. I don't think the revolution is ever going to be for sale. I don't think we're ever going to buy our way into freedom. Not from capitalism. And I know that's weird, right? Like, because I need money all the time. But, nah. Like, until the system, like, in the end, like, right, would not run out and buy a MAGA hat. Right? That's not... People who think that they're like, God, your stupid freaking hats. I know I shouldn't. I hate those hats. Like, but, you know, it's that idea that, like, oh, I'm buying this thing, and so I'm fighting, I don't know, third world hunger by buying this comic book, and it doesn't make any sense to me. Like, I'm down with people being like, I'm buying this comic because I want to support the person who wrote it, or the person who drew it. Right, buying in itself, Mars's Pants says, is an act we have to do to participate in a system that's classist, and has been since literally the first civilization. And I strongly agree with that. Like, that's my main problem with it, is that when we're treating, like, buying as this, like, symbol of moral good, like a thing someone does to be morally good, that puts people who are impoverished in an impossible situation where their moral rightness is judged socially on consuming habits that they just cannot afford to participate in. Like, okay, this is an excellent point. Mars's Pam points out they're buying a mobility aid cheap, and it was probably made in not a great place by underpaid people. But otherwise she couldn't obtain, or they, I'm so sorry. Otherwise, I don't know your pronouns and I shouldn't have assumed. They couldn't obtain a walking stick. And, yeah, like, that's a huge problem. Like, I kind of feel like we get into that problem when it comes to telling people, yeah, consuming to be a model citizen. The pink ribbon Susan G. Komen stuff. and a lot of that money goes purely into profit. That is totally true, Button Addict. Oh my god. The Susan G. Komen stuff is infuriating because everyone kind of like is like, I'm buying yogurt with a pink ribbon on it, and so I'm fighting cancer. But like, really, major things we have to do to fight like skyrocketing cancer rates are going to be demanding ecological safeguards against corporations dumping in our environment, and demanding like, oh, Zer. I love Zer pronouns, actually. I have a character who has them in a twine I've been working on. I think they're so pretty. So, like, this idea that, like, to be I think, like, a better way to fight cancer is to, like, stop corporations from dumping cancer-causing chemicals into our poor neighborhoods, where people, especially into our poor neighborhoods, where people aren't having the coverage that they need to get regularly screened, so they die from it constantly. Like, better healthcare access and screening services for sure, but also, like, on a big level, like, if we want to stop, like, rising cancer rates, we have to stop corporations from dumping cancer-causing chemicals into our environment. Like, we need better control on that. It's a sad, true fact. I think one of the things, services that don't scare fat people away from them. Yeah. I think that's one of the main reasons people say to me, like, oh, like, why do fat people get this, that, or the other thing? And I always want to point them towards this essay by Paul Ernstberger in the Fat Studies Reader, where he actually makes this brilliant case. Like, he breaks down all these different studies and kind of brings them together after studying all these studies, and he's able to make this brilliant case that actually the cause of detrimental health concerns, like detriments to health for fat people, are generally related to socioeconomic class and are also related to stress from stigma. So I love that essay because, like, it brings up all these really excellent points about how, like, heart disease really is a problem of the poor, not the fat. It's just that fat people, we get paid less, and we're 10% more likely to experience poverty. So, like, so that sort of messes it all up. What do you all think would a better model of these services look like for fat people? Like, I think one of the big things we have to do is we have to move to a place where weight is not automatically taken anymore. Because I need to be clear to everyone, doctors were not taking people's weights for a long time. That was not normal. Yeah, being poor and living in low-income areas, and areas where toxic things are probably dumped, it does. Actually, you know, what's interesting is there's also concerns that children who grow up in impoverished neighborhoods are more likely to be fat because there are these things called because of basically chemical reactions that cause hormonal imbalances in their bodies. And, obviously there's nothing wrong with being fat, but if poor people are living in areas that make them fat, either through food choices or through all the available food options, or through environmental contaminants, through any of that, what we're seeing in those situations is that then there's a correlation between poverty and fatness in people's minds anyway. And because we have this long history of seeing the poor as blighted, as we discussed, what we see is the fat person is considered blighted, and considered ill, considered a sign of social sickness. Big thing would be to eliminate the BMI model. I hugely agree with that. A more transparent model, one where doctors admit they don't know everything, that would be hugely helpful. That would create such a more peaceful experience, not just for fat people, but a more transparent model, I think, would help mentally ill people who are seeking care, would help disabled people who are seeking care. Just a more transparent model, and one where doctors admit they don't know everything, would be huge for all the disabled people I know. Button-Addict points out that the idea in medicine that fat equals ill will be a hard thing to eliminate. So many studies have shown it, but it's ignored en masse. That's really true, but I would ask why you think that is, and if you all have done any reading into the Obesity Inc., the people who were on the NIH Council on Obesity at the same time that Surgeon General Koop started the Shape Up America campaign with all the money from the diet industries, and then there was the Fen-Phen disaster, and they put out that press release from the Shape Up America offices supporting Wyeth Ayers, creators of Fen-Phen. I should break down that essay for you all next time. We should get into the market construction before we get into the construction of the language of epidemic, because it'll be easier to understand that kind of idea of an invading force if we can understand first why people ignore the studies, what they have to lose. It's just so frustrating that we as consumers in a broken healthcare system are tasked with fixing a system we're already paying too much for. That's what Marzipan says, and yeah. And you see how the way neoliberalism works. We are tasked with fixing it. We, the consumers, are tasked with fixing it with our consuming powers. There is a huge financial incentive to uphold the thin ideal. But, when you break down, all these players in kind of, there was this major turn at the end of the 90s where it didn't start because it had been a concern previously of the government, but it became a concern of the government again. We will definitely get into that next time. And I say next time because it's been about 45 minutes. And I have enjoyed... Well, it's been about 40 minutes, but whatever. I have enjoyed doing this, but I feel like we are at the end of our class. Either that, or I could take a 15-minute break and then return to you. Broadcast alert. Yeah, I'll return in like probably 10 or 15 minutes. And then if you leave some more of your brilliant observations, I will do my best to find some excerpts that you may find useful for your points. that was an imperative break. With that said, does anyone have any questions? Oh, see you, Marzipan. And if anyone has any questions, I can answer any of those. Otherwise, I may call it here after 5 minutes of silence. And that way, no one will hear me tell people that if you are interested, I will be doing another one of these on Friday. I will be aiming for probably a 7 p.m. Pacific start time. We started at 6:30 tonight. We'll probably start at 7 on Friday. And thank you all so much for dropping in, for watching, for engaging with the subject of fat studies, for just being cool. I was really nervous to do this, and this was really fun, and I really was worried that I was going to get hit with the old YouTube BS, but instead this was honestly incredibly fun and just a blast to do, and I just really appreciate all of you. So have a wonderful rest of your evening, and I will hopefully see you on Friday. Bye-bye.